The first light of day arrived slowly in Willowbrook, as if it, too, had decided not to rush. The sun did not so much rise as it unfurled, its pale gold stretching carefully across the rooftops of the little stone cottages. It touched the frost on the cobbled streets until they glimmered faintly, like the smallest scattering of diamonds. It was the sort of morning that seemed to ask for quiet, the sort where even the sparrows in the eaves chirped softly, as though aware of how still the air was. Only the baker's shop sign moved, creaking gently as a light breeze coaxed it back and forth. In a cottage at the edge of the lane, Mr. Edwin Carter was awake, though he had not yet risen. He sat on the side of his bed, the blanket pooled in his lap, watching how the light grew stronger behind the thin curtains. There was no reason to hurry. The day was waiting patiently for him, and he saw no need to keep it from waiting a little longer. Somewhere nearby, faint but unmistakable, came the warm, comforting scent of bread baking, the kind that carried through the air and settled in a person's memory. It reminded Edwin that he would need to fetch a loaf later in the morning, though there was no urgency in the thought. It was simply something pleasant to look forward to. After several more moments of quiet, he rose, dressed in his usual soft wool jumper, and padded to the kitchen. The kettle took its time heating on the small stove, the water eventually whispering into a gentle boil. He poured it over the leaves, the steam curling upward like a slow dance. He cupped the mug in his hands, letting the warmth seep into his fingers, and took small, careful sips. There was no sound but the faint hum of the wind outside, and somewhere far off, the measured clatter of a cart rolling over the stones.
After his tea, Edwin decided to walk to the bakery. He put on his old brown coat, which still smelled faintly of wood smoke from the previous winter, and stepped outside. The lane was quiet, just as it usually was in the early morning. The frost on the cobblestones caught the sunlight, making each step glimmer faintly. The hedgerows lining the lane were still tipped with dew, each droplet trembling when a light breeze passed through. He walked at a pace that could only be called unhurried. Now and then he paused to greet a neighbor, Mrs. Latham, who was tending to her window boxes of winter pansies. Young Thomas, who was brushing down his father's pony. Mr. Blackwell, sweeping the front step of his general store. At the bakery, the warm, yeasty air met him before he even opened the door. Inside, shelves were stacked with round loaves, whose crusts shone faintly in the lamplight. The baker, Mrs. Collins, offered him his usual, a whole wheat loaf, still warm, wrapped in a square of brown paper. "Bit of a chill in the air today," she remarked as she handed it over. "Yes, but it's a good day for walking."
Instead of going straight home, Edwin decided to take the meadow path that wound behind the cottages. The path was narrow, bordered by dry stone walls, and in some places it was overgrown with grass. The meadow itself was a muted green, the kind that comes in late autumn before the first snow. A few sheep grazed lazily near the far fence, their breath visible in little puffs. Overhead, the same slow-moving cloud from earlier had shifted, stretching out into a faint, feathery line. Every so often, Edwin would stop, set down his loaf, and simply watch the grass bow and lift in the breeze. The movement was steady, unchanging, and strangely soothing. He came to the old willow tree that marked the halfway point. Its long branches trailed over the ground, forming a kind of curtain. He stepped inside the shelter of its leaves, which swayed gently around him, filtering the sunlight into a soft, green glow. Here he sat for a while on a low, flat stone, resting the bread beside him. He listened to the sound of the stream nearby, not rushing, just trickling over smooth stones.
Rising from the willow's shade, Edwin followed the path as it curved back toward the village. It passed the mill pond, which was as still as glass except for the faintest ripples left by a pair of ducks. He leaned on the wooden rail at the pond's edge and watched a leaf detach itself from a branch,
turn slowly in the air and land on the water with a quiet touch. The circles it made spread gently, wider and wider, until the surface was calm again. When he reached his cottage, the kitchen clock showed that it was not yet midday. He placed the bread on the table, cut a slice, and spread it with a thin layer of butter. The crust crackled softly as he bit into it. Afterwards, he settled into his armchair by the unlit fire. The air inside was cool but pleasant. He opened a book, a novel whose words were already familiar, and let the pages turn at their own slow pace. As the afternoon faded, the light outside grew softer, warmer. Edwin closed his book and stepped into the garden. From the gate, he could see the village rooftops, the first wisps of chimney smoke curling into the sky. The air held the scent of suppers beginning, stews simmering, bread toasting, vegetables roasting. Somewhere, a bell marked the hour. Edwin returned inside, cut another slice of bread, and paired it with a wedge of mild cheese. He ate slowly, listening to the faint ticking of the clock.
Darkness came gradually, like a blanket drawn up over the village. Edwin lit a single lamp, the light pooling gently on the table. He washed his cup, dried it, and set it back in its place. At the window, he looked out at the frost returning to the cobbles, glittering faintly under the lamps. There was no sound but the occasional sigh of the wind. Satisfied, he went to his bedroom, lay down, and let the day replay in his mind. The bread, the willow, the pond, the stillness. Before he finished recalling them all, he drifted quietly into sleep. Darkness came gradually, like a blanket drawn up over the village. Edwin lit a single lamp, the light pooling gently on the table. He washed his cup, dried it, and set it back in its place. At the window, he looked out at the frost returning to the cobbles, glittering faintly under the lamps. There was no sound but the occasional sigh of the wind. Satisfied, he went to his bedroom, lay down, and let the day replay in his mind. The bread, the willow, the pond, the stillness. Before he finished recalling them all, he drifted quietly into sleep.